Hey everybody, welcome back to VideoMess. So today we're continuing series on the MiSTer FPGA DE10 Nano project and the Nintendo 64 Core. And this video today is actually one that all of you guys requested. I actually hadn't thought about this as an idea, but you wanted to see the Nintendo 64 Core in direct video mode on RetroTink 4K, dealing with some of the de-interlacing versus using clean HDMI mode. Once I read the comments, it seemed like a fun video, so I figured why not. If you get too far involved, then do me a huge favor, down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. But right off the top, this is Castlevania Legacy of Darkness in clean HDMI mode, so you get a 480p image out of the frame buffer, but you do lose some of the VI implementations. People were very curious to see what it would look like if we used the RetroTink 4K in direct video mode and let that handle the de-interlacing. This is all just motion adaptive. I haven't changed anything around. This is a bone stock out of the Tink image. You will now see that Castlevania Legacy of Darkness loses almost all of those interlacing lines, but it still keeps that Vaseline look with all the VI implementation on. And this is actually a very nice look, but of course this is all subjective. If you like clean HDMI mode with some of the VI implementations automatically turned off, that would be what was right for you. For me, I actually like Castlevania Legacy of Darkness with a little bit of Vaseline and the de-interlacing from the RetroTink 4K. As we move back over to the MiSTer source, and this is interlaced right here, this is what it looks like on MiSTer if you do not have clean HDMI on. You're going to see a lot of the interlacing lines in Cornell's hair there. And as we move back over to clean HDMI, they will go away, but the image will get sharper. The fun part about the Tink is it lands right in the middle. It keeps that blurry image that's synonymous with Nintendo 64, but it takes away like 97 to 98% of the interlacing lines in the actual motion. The motion adaptive de-interlacer is extremely good on the RetroTink, and it has been updated recently, so if you haven't changed your firmware, definitely do that. So I'm running you through the same spot here. This is clean HDMI on MiSTer FPGA, and you can see that there's no interlacing whatsoever, but it is a much crisper, much sharper image, and I do think that looks really nice. Again, this is all subjective. Whatever looks good to you should be what you choose. Now as we run through the exact same space with the RetroTink 4K in direct video mode, handling the de-interlacing and keeping all the VI implementations on, you will see that it's a completely different image. It's somewhere between using the standard VI pipeline on Nintendo 64 Core and clean HDMI, giving you kind of the best of both worlds. And this is definitely something that, depending on the game you're playing, you might want to change around. Again, as we go back to the MiSTer capture, you'll see here that water. Pay attention to how it looks, and we will go to clean HDMI mode, and you'll see that it definitely loses the interlacing, but it gets a little bit crispier. Now if we move over to the RetroTink 4K handling the de-interlacing, you're going to see the image stays smooth, it stays a little bit blurry, but basically all of the interlacing lines have been removed from the image, and that is a really nice look, and I'm always impressed with the de-interlacer on the RetroTink 4K. It does an outstanding job. Now before you leave that comment down below, I understand this is not a cheap combination in any way, shape, or form. The RetroTink 4K combined with MiSTer FPGA is probably the most expensive way to do something like this, but it is just for a fun test to see what we can get out of these two combination FPGA devices. But I'm not just talking about de-interlacing here, I'm also just talking about Nintendo 64 over direct video in 4K. Seeing something like Super Mario 64 run in 4K just looks so good. You can allow this just to bypass the MiSTer scaler, go direct video in, which I did a video on and I will link below, and then let the RetroTink 4K handle the entire scale. This is a very good looking Super Mario 64. Obviously, the difference between 1080p and 4K isn't as huge as one would think. It is a ton more pixels, but honestly, in an image that is as soft as Nintendo 64, it does look better, but it's not something that's going to be insanely night or day compared to the de-interlacing examples I'm showing you. But even with that said, seeing Super Mario 64 running in 4K into my capture card and in this video just looks outstanding, and if you haven't already toggled 4K on in the timeline, make sure you do that so you see the overall resolution that we have here. And this is just why it's so fun to kind of combine these two things together. You get some really outstanding results in many ways, shapes, and forms, and I do just love the poppy colors and the overall 240p-ness of this upscaled to 4K through the RetroTink. It's a very fun look. It's obviously very low latency. The RetroTink's basically adding nothing, and obviously MiSTer FPGA is adding nothing, so it is just an extremely good way to play this, even if it is one of the more expensive ways to do it. And honestly, you really can't complain too much about that. And of course we have to deliver the baby to the penguin mother. Never throw the baby off the edge. I never do that. I know some people like it, but honestly we're a save the animals sort of channel here. But again, just the color rendition, the overall image at 4K through the RetroTink with the MiSTer is just something I absolutely love to see. So if you have these two devices, if you're thinking whether or not a RetroTink 4K is worth it for MiSTer FPGA, I can't recommend it enough. Yes, it's expensive, but it is worth it for what it does for you. Now moving over to something like Perfect Dark, this is a game that is interlaced when it runs in the high resolution mode, and when we turn Clean HDMI on, you definitely get a better image. It's 480p versus 480i, but it definitely crisps up the overall game. But I actually think Clean HDMI is my preferred look for something like Perfect Dark. Now if we move over to the RetroTink 4K handling it, it gets all of that softness back, all of the interlacing basically drops out, so you get a more accurate looking Perfect Dark, and it does have that smear, but for some reason, at least on Perfect Dark, I actually prefer the sharpness, but leave me a comment down below and tell me what you think. And that is the main takeaway of all these different video modes and all of these different deinterlacers across scalars and MiSTer FPGA. It is 100% subjective as to what you want it to do. It doesn't really matter. And you'll see there the menu, at least for me, opens up perfectly fine. Some people have been having issues with direct video and menus, but I'm not sure why that is. I'm looking into it, but I don't have that problem on my end. So if you have an issue with direct video, send me your INI file. Just ask for contact me in the comments, and I'll take a look at it because I'm trying to figure this out for a lot of people. But as we move down here again into the building, I do like this blurry look. It makes the lights look a little bit softer, and you'll see here I'm basically not even shooting the enemies, showing you how close to stormtroopers they truly are with their aim. Now if I move back over to my MiSTer FPGA capture on Clean HDMI, you will notice that there's obviously no interlacing lines, but the image becomes very sharp, and I actually like that in Perfect Dark. But again, this is all subjective testing. You get to pick whatever you like, and that's why it's fun to be able to put all of these things together, because if we turn Clean HDMI off and go to the original VI pipeline, you're going to see that we get that blur back, but some of the interlacing lines will appear. Now they're not as drastic in Perfect Dark as some other games I've played, but honestly they are there. So being able to put the RetroTink 4K and the MiSTer FPGA Core together for games will allow you to have that same look that you would see in Nintendo 64, the blur, the Vaseline effect, along with that deinterlacer, and that is a very nice combo. And honestly, you could basically flip a coin and decide which one looked better here, because they both look spectacular. The reality is we just get options on how we actually want to articulate the image, because running around in Perfect Dark here with the motion adaptive deinterlacing on, with the original VI pipeline implementation all configured in the MiSTer FPGA Core, this again just looks like some of the best Nintendo 64 footage you're going to get. You would need an HDMI modded Nintendo 64 to get close to this, and then you would need the RetroTink on top of it, and honestly that's just one console. Think of all the other combinations you could put together with these two things. But honestly, with the motion adaptive deinterlacing and the original VI implementation, Perfect Dark just looks absolutely outstanding. But let's move to another game that does a lot of weird things with signals, and that is Resident Evil 2. This thing flip-flops between 240p and 480i scene to scene in some instances, and I will give the MiSTer FPGA scaler the ultimate credit. It changes those sources and gives you a display on your LCD or on your capture card instantaneously. You'd barely even know that it was switching resolutions from 240p to 480i. Now the RetroTink 4K is going to do as equally as good of a job at that, but honestly the Tink and the MiSTer are neck and neck as far as that speed is concerned. The nice thing is with the motion adaptive deinterlacing, here you're going to lose a lot of the interlacing lines in Leon Kennedy's model and all of the other zombies. That is just for the 3D aspects. Obviously everything else being pre-rendered, you're not really going to see much of a change to that, whether you're on Clean HDMI mode or you're using the motion adaptive deinterlacer on Tink 4K. And you'll see here as we run all the way into Kendo's gun shop, every single time the camera changes, basically, it changes resolutions, including when we open this door. Now as we move back over to the MiSTer source, you're going to see we get that same quick switching, but all of the models are going to have the interlacing lines in them. And this is one where Clean HDMI mode doesn't clean them up as much because of the pre-rendered nature of most of the assets on the screen. But it still does an incredible job of switching the resolutions, and again, this is just two different looks for the same game, and honestly here, the interlacing lines really don't bother me whatsoever because it's only on a few models as they run around. And you'll see here, there's that resolution change on MiSTer as fast as it was on RetroTink 4K. But as we run down the hallways on Tink again, you can see, especially when Leon Kennedy's model gets closer to the screen, the complete lack of interlacing lines. Mike Chi just absolutely nailed all of these deinterlacing filters, motion adaptive being my favorite. There really isn't anything on the market that can come close to this unless you start getting into the 5-digit film production hardware. Sure, there's a lot of different things on the preservation and restoration front that you could use to basically deinterlace content, but that is going to be basically the cost of almost a late model used Honda Accord versus the $700 on the Tink. So honestly, what you're getting here is extremely good. And you'll see here as we move around and even jump into the menus, it's going to swap back and forth. Now I did scale this footage in post for a reason, so you're going to see that resolution kind of goes off the screen, but that's me doing something in the background playing around versus what the Tink is doing. But again, Resident Evil 2 with the motion adaptive deinterlacing just looks so incredible, and it switches resolution so quickly. You're going to have an absolutely good time. Where you'll see here on MiSTer FPGA a little bit of interlacing lines, but honestly this one isn't the worst in my opinion. Now, of course, I'm not going to let you get out of this video without seeing some Bomberman Hero footage, because if you watch my channel whatsoever, you know this is my favorite Nintendo 64 game of all time, and we're going to get the Bomber Pitch, which is just a timeshare agreement. So Bomberman, you should run as fast as you can and get the hell out of there. All jokes aside, I just always loved that Bomber Pitch line, and I figured I could get a joke out of it. Now, Bomberman Hero is a game that is exclusively 240p, so you're really not doing anything with the interlacing whatsoever, but I just love how this game looks at 4K in my capture card and on my television. All of the graphics, all of the textures, all of the fun colors that are in this game, all of the character models just come across so well in that 4K resolution. And obviously with MiSTer FPGA, native 4K is not something you can get out of the system. It's just not going to be handling that resolution. But the great part is with the Direct Video 1 mode, we can inject that 240p signal into HDMI in on RetroTink 4K, and then we can scale it all the way up to 4K with HDMI out. And there's so many different filters and different settings you can put on top of this. I have left all the footage stock here. We're just kind of talking about 4K deinterlacing and other options like that. But honestly, I just think this is such an outstanding image. You would not get this clean of an image out of an HDMI modded Nintendo 64 unless you threw the Tink in the mix as well, because those scalers and HDMI mods for Nintendo 64 are going to cap out at 1080p. And I just love how these colorful games look when you get them all the way to 4K. And obviously with MiSTer FPGA in direct video mode, you're adding zero latency to anything whatsoever, and with the RetroTink's output being well under a frame of latency, you're basically getting zero lag gameplay out of Nintendo 64 on the MiSTer FPGA with the RetroTink. You honestly could not beat this. There is no latency that any human being would ever be able to detect. You're basically down to just looking at math at that point in time, but the human mind is just not really going to notice it whatsoever. And again, I just love how Bomberman Hero looks overall as a graphical style, and as well as in 4K. This is just such a fun way to play. I'm halfway through another casual playthrough of this game, and I've been playing in direct video mode with my RetroTink 4K, and it has been probably the best I've ever seen Bomberman Hero look. Now moving over to Rogue Squadron, this is one that I definitely think benefits a lot from the clean HDMI mode on MiSTer FPGA, and I fixed a little bit of the garbage overdraw in post. This is a game that I feel like heavily interlaces when you're not using the clean HDMI mode. Sure, this is sharper, but it definitely improves the overall screen cadence, and that deinterlacing just looks so good at 480p because it's not an interlaced source. But honestly, the sharpness here may bother some of you, and this is one of the games you guys asked me to test. As we move over to the original VI pipeline here on MiSTer, the interlacing comes right back. But let's move over to the RetroTink 4K with the motion adaptive deinterlacing on and having it in the original VI pipeline. Now we've gotten rid of a large majority of the interlacing lines, but we still kept that kind of blurry smeariness that Nintendo 64 is used to and known for. And this definitely kind of mellows out all of the terrain and just takes the image out a little bit softer. As we move back over to clean HDMI mode here, I do like the sharpness in this game. I think maybe the blur is a little too blurry, but on RetroTink you're getting that blur without most of the interlacing lines, and I know that's going to make a lot of you happy. And that again is just basically the takeaway that I want you to think of when you think of this video. You get to pick which works for you, and that is why I'm sure a lot of you guys asked me to test these things. Now I understand the market that has both of these devices next to their television is going to be narrow, but I know it's a decent amount of you, at least on the viewership front, and I'm sure a lot more of you will be adding a RetroTink 4K to your retro gaming setup in the future, because honestly it hasn't even been out that long. But putting these two things together is just a great combination. You get get so many different options. You can do things in the core, you can do things on RetroTink 4K, you can get the signal to 4K, everything works, except if you do go to clean HDMI mode, you're not going to get a signal out of your RetroTink just because of how the MiSTer Core deals with it. That's not a combination you're going to get, but you can basically create that by turning off VI implementations within the menu. So you just do it manually versus on one toggle switch. But whether you go clean HDMI or you go motion adaptive deinterlacing on RetroTink 4K, the image is going to be great either way. But you guys asked for this video, you wanted to see what MiSTer FPGA in direct video mode with the RetroTink 4K would do on the Nintendo 64 core, so that's exactly what it does do. Some games like Legacy of Darkness I prefer on the RetroTink with the deinterlacing and the original VI implementation. Other games like Perfect Dark I prefer clean HDMI and just letting the Tink do the scale. But whatever works for you makes me happy, makes you happy, and you should be happy for it. If you have any other requests for videos like this, leave them down below, but we're done. Go play some Nintendo 64 and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.